I made this from flour and beet juice. In 4 ounces, it has 120 calories, 24 grams of protein, and 4 grams of carbs. It is fantastic torn into chunks or thinly sliced. There's a lot of recipe possibilities here. In my previous video, I showed you how to make a classic seitan from just flour and water. That version of seitan is meant to be more like a light meat resembling chicken, where this version is meant to be more like a roast beef. It's not exactly like a roast beef, but there's really no other way to describe it. This is a 5-pound bag of bread flour, and here I used a 32-ounce bottle of pre-made beet juice because I didn't want to juice 8 beets myself. You would probably need about 8 to 10 large beets for enough juice to create a dough with the flour, and since this was pretty dry, I added another cup of water to get the dough to kind of like more mixed together. I like using a dough scraper to help collect all the extra flour on the sides and help it work together. So I let it rest for about an hour, and then you do some stretches and folds to help build up the gluten for a higher yield, but that's totally optional. So you cover it in water and you sprinkle in 2 tablespoons of sea salt and you let it rest overnight. The next day you strain it away, and from here you start washing it. And you want to think of it like kneading it under water. Use cold water and be gentle. And save the starch for other recipes, otherwise you could just dump it down the drain. I typically save my starch from the first 3 washes, and then I dump the rest as the starch washes out. And what's cool is in this recipe you can see the starch in the seitan while you wash it. The seitan will go from a light pink color to a darker mauve. You'll see ribbons of the light pink starch in the seitan, and you just keep washing it until just about all the starch is gone. A little bit of starch in your seitan is okay, but if you don't wash it enough, it'll be pretty doughy in texture. So after it's washed, you set it aside, and in another bowl, you're gonna create your seasoning rub. You could crumble in one of those like vegetarian bouillon beef cubes. I'm not doing this because maltodextrine upsets my stomach, so I create my own seasoning. You don't have to do this combination, just think savory flavors. Smoked salts, miso, or like a dash of mushroom garum could be great here. So you just rub it in and continue to stretch it out. And then you flip it over and rub in less of your seasonings, drizzle over some Blackstrap Molases because it's really high in iron and it helps add a more bloody flavor to it. And then you roll your seitan and then you tie it into tight knots. You want to continue to tie knots into itself to create one big knotted loaf. So my cast iron pot is on a super high heat. I'm using a safflower oil and I'm frying the exterior of the seitan. This creates a skin to help prevent the seitan from expanding too much when it simmers. This helps keep the seitan shreddy in texture. Since this loaf is pretty big and hard to flip, I like to use 2 spatulas to help flip it. And once it's evenly cooked on the outside, place it inside of a stock sock or wrap it tightly inside of a cheesecloth. From here, you add the seitan to some high iron vegetable broth. This is a variation on my vegan beef broth recipe, but I added some of my leftover black garlic broth from my last batch of seitan. I was also all out of red wine, so I skipped that. The recipe that I used is in this caption. You can use whatever broth that you like. I think what works best for this recipe is a vegan or vegetarian beef broth. I let this slow cook for 24 hours and I left it on keep warm for 24 hours. So the keep warm for 24 hours was not intentional. I was out dancing over the weekend and I forgot about it the next day. But I think it made it turn out even better. Like, look at how firm this is. When you cook it at a low temperature for a long time, the seitan picks up all the flavor from the broth and becomes very meaty and also dense. You can either cut it with a sharp knife or with a meat slicer for really thin slices for sandwiches, or you can crumble it up like here. You can freeze it for up to a year, or you can use it within a week out of the fridge. Subscribe to see my next video on how to use this seitan.